Hey, what is going on everybody, and welcome to Fantasia. For today, we're going to be jumping into another session of Epic 7 Now today. Got some more balance adjustments for you guys. That's right, this week is the week for some change, and boy oh boy do they have some good things prepared for us here. Highly anticipated hero, Fallen Cecilia, gonna get her balance adjustment along with Krau with his Awakened Potential update, kinda making its way here. So we've already seen Ravi, we've already seen Alencia, and we saw a bit of a closer Charles buff, but now finally Krau, alright, the first of the quad Awakened Potential batch to have their update cancelled, but we're gonna see it here. We'll talk about that as we move along. But Fallen Cecilia, Remnant Violet, Fire Lilias, Diene, Krau, Ludwig, and Roz, including his Adventure Roz form, are all gonna get buffs. No 4 stars this time around, but we do have 2 5-star artifacts getting buffed here. Wings of Light and Shadow, the Night artifact, and Uberius' Tooth, okay? So let's go ahead and dive right into this here. So starting off with Fallen Cecilia, and that is not a lot of green text for someone who has been, people have been begging for buffs for, right, for many months. This is actually, fun fact, the only buff that Fallen Cecilia has ever gotten. She's never been buffed upon release. So we're gonna go ahead and take a look here with her skill 1, where she attacks the enemy, 100% chance to provoke here. Nothing has changed except that the damage dealt has been increased. Now we don't know what the amount is. It could be a pretty substantial increase in her damage scaling with her HP, right? Or it could just be damage dealt overall, like her multiplier damage could actually be increased as well. So that would be pretty decent, right? They might make her a bit more damage oriented, as we can see here. You see a lot of things like damage dealt increase down here as well. We'll get to it. But then now you can soul burn to ignore effect resistance, so you don't need to build effectiveness on her necessarily. Not that anyone really did. People either went for a general tank build, or they went for something with like crit chance and crit damage back in the day. But now her passive gives her a free 10% max health increase, which I think it seems low, right? It seems on the low side. They probably could have gone for, people are saying like could have gone for like a 15-20% health increase, but I think coupled with a couple other things we're going to talk about, this is actually a pretty good addition here. Any max health increase for already a really high base health unit is going to be fantastic. Her barrier strength is also going to be increased, which by the way scales with her max health, so this is going to help her out a lot in terms of her starting bonus for the entire team, right? Now the other thing that we're going to see here is that her S3 has also been changed. So now she will dispel all buffs from the opponents before granting skill nullifier once to all allies, and this skill now cannot trigger a counterattack. Right, the damage dealt for the skill is going to be increased, and while they do decrease the cooldowns for it, they also increase the amount of souls, so double win there. Usually it's kind of rare to see that. Usually when they decrease the skill cooldowns, they'll decrease the amount of souls that are acquired, but this is pretty decent. So her damage dealt is increased, right, along with her S1. This makes me kind of want to believe that she's going to be more damage oriented. People are going to be building her with crit chance and crit rate. The other reason why I think that is because the biggest change to her here is her imprint release. She's no longer giving effect resistance to the team, guys. She's given up to 12 speed to everyone on your team. This is huge. This is the only other unit I believe that gives 12 speed imprint is Vildred, right? Green Vildred, because he has a team speed imprint buff, and that is big. She is, I think, the only other 5-star besides Vildred. I kind of want to say besides Vildred to get that. Yeah, so Vildred's team imprint is 12 speed. Just confirm that here in the game. But yeah, 12 speed. This is huge. It's for everybody, so it's not like concentrated to 2 slots or anything like that. This is for everyone on the team, excluding herself. So this makes me want to believe that she is kind of being encouraged to be used in a more aggro or cleave-oriented team, she could be a very strong anchor for the team. This barrier with this max HP here, and the fact that she can even do damage, you don't have to have her super tanky, guys. You can build her with crit rate and crit damage, and you can build her with like 250 something speed. You know, she could be a little cleanup unit that goes after your DPSs. Could be very strong in the right hands, in the right teams, right? Now, the other thing that people are speculating is that this is a buff that's used to benefit Emelpera. This is encouraging people to use her with Emelpera because Emelpera can cleanse debuffs on your team. Meanwhile, Fallen Cecilia, if she follows up with that, she can now dispel all buffs on the opponent's team, right? So between the two, you basically get full coverage, which is kind of nice. Now, this skill cannot trigger a counterattack on her S3 is actually amazing. It seems very subtle, but there's so many times where if you use Fallen Cecilia's S3, and your opponent has like an AoE unit that can counter, or even something like, let's say, a Navy Captain Landy or Abyssal Euphine, just very common counter units, right? When they counter, and like Landy salvos or Abyssal Euphine just AoE counters, you lose all of the benefits of your S3. You basically did nothing when you built Fallen Cecilia with no damage and just pure HP, right? So you're gonna go throughout your S3, get that skill nullifier, it gets, well, nullified, and you're left with nothing, you dealt no damage, and you're back to square one. This at least guarantees that you will keep a skill nullifier up for your team, which is honestly kind of amazing. And again, if she's an anchor or something like that in an aggressive team, this is giving your already very chunky units, because the barriers, another chance at living, right? Especially the squishy cleave units that you might have. So Fallen Cecilia, well, going from kind of an anti-cleave role back in the day to full-on might be the next greatest cleave anchor. Who knows? Seems, you know, some people are kind of disappointed with the changes here, but I think she might have potential. Again, we'll definitely need to see. And at minimum, people are just going to be building her because she's a 12-speed imprint. If you're playing aggressively or you're cleaving and stuff, opening with a Fallen Cecilia first pick now is very strong. And it's going to be very good value, right? Okay, so let's continue moving on here to the next unit, Remnant Violet. Look at this. Very little text, right? They actually decreases cooldowns of his S3 by 1 turn, which is great, and his S3 now gives himself 50% combat readiness increase while increasing his damage dealt, which is good. He always needs damage increases, right? His damage kind of falls off just because there's defense penetration resistance units out there, so he has a hard time struggling to kill those units. But even outside of that, you know, his damage is decent, but for the builds that he's on, I think most people are still going for like a lifesteal build. Very few people can really pull off a full speed type of build. But yeah, he's gonna be pretty good now, especially because this 50% combat readiness. Because Emelpera, guess what? She gives everybody a swift attack buff, right? The buff that lets you gain 50% combat readiness after you take your first turn, after you take the turn when you have the buff. So what happens is Remnant Violet, if he S3s here, right, not only is he going to do a ton of damage, but now he's going to take an extra turn, essentially, real quick, take an extra turn, and then S1. Coupled with the fact that he has a cooldown reduction already built in, now he is going to be churning out a lot of damage really fast. His turn cycling is going to be kind of insane, but that's, again, only with an Emelpera. So nothing with his evasion or anything has been increased or adjusted, so he's still just going to be 70% evasion. His 50% with 20% from his artifact. If you run it with Emelpera, 90% evasion, still 10% chance to get hit. Still gets hit by Shaltir 100% of the time, so do gotta watch out for that. But yeah, Remnant Violet looking pretty cool, but kind of being shoehorned into this like, hey, use with Emelpera, guys. Good DPS for Emelpera. But still pretty cool to see. He's dropped out of the meta, and he hasn't been relevant for quite a while now. Speaking of dropping out of the meta, when Lua, not my cringe Lua that I always use in RTA, but the blue Lua, when she was dominating the meta, Fire Lilias was buffed to kind of counter her, to counter her S2s and her S3 mostly. S2, if Lilias was put to sleep, Lilias was made so that she could dispel a debuff from the caster if the opponent used a non-attack skill. So when Lua S2'd the Lilias and put her to sleep, and she S3s with a non-attack skill, Lilias cleanses the sleep from herself and then was able to cleanse the entire team, right, with her own S3. Especially with Mort and his artifact, allowing Fire Lilias to reduce the cooldowns of the team by 1 turn, she essentially nullified Lua's entire existence. The issue with this is that a lot of people ran a debuffing artifact with Lua. Song of the Stars was the most common one because there's a 100% chance to put a target debuff on the opponent, and if you had the target debuff and the sleep debuff, when Lilias dispelled 1 debuff from herself, she actually dispelled the target debuff first instead of the sleep. So that was a huge issue because now you're still asleep, you can't cleanse the team, and you can't proc your skills. So, and you can't, increase your, reduce the cooldowns of your teammates that Lua just increased. So that was a way that Lua can counter Fire Lilias. Well, they decided to buff Lilias way too late because no one's using Blue Lua anymore, but still welcome change. The 50% crit rate when attacking on her S1 and her S3 is actually just loaded into her passive now. She'll always have a passive critical hit chance increased by 50%, which is decent. And then after an enemy uses a non-attack skill, she will now dispel all debuffs from herself. And then this can still only be activated once every 2 turns, right? Kind of coincides with Lua and how fast she can turn cycle. Her S3 now, when she attacks a target that is provoked, the damage dealt is increased, and the general damage dealt is also still increased too, which is pretty cool. And the provoke here makes sense because when an opponent uses a non-attack skill, Lilias is going to cleanse, she's going to push herself up, and then she's going to provoke the enemy, right? She gains 25% combat readiness. She decreases combat readiness of that person by 25%, and then she will go ahead and provoke. So when she provokes, it's pretty nice because now she will deal extra damage. More damage, the better. Her damage on her S3 is actually kind of insane, and she is a very common Guild War defense unit. So with these changes coming up here, I wouldn't be surprised if you saw some weird high attack unit plus Lilias defense team again. It used to be something like Senya with Lilias, right, on a defense team. That used to be a very common thing to see. So we'll definitely, hopefully, see her come back around and get her time to shine. Alright, next up we have her exclusive equipment, which is actually kind of important. So instead of increasing the damage dealt by 20% with her EE, which we can probably assume is the damage dealt like that they put into the buffs here, then what's going to happen is when she activates her suppression, her S2, she actually grants immunity to the caster for 2 turns. She's going to grant that immunity buff to herself, kind of like ML Kawazu. When ML Kawazu does his non-attack skill, right after someone does an AoE, he's able to cleanse himself, but then he's also able to put up immunity so that people can't follow up and just debuff him immediately. Same thing with Fire Lilias here. This is actually really good, and I think it might be one of her best EEs now, just because the immunity grants you so much protection to basically guarantee that you can cleanse with her, which is very nice. Her S3 cleanse is very strong, dispels all debuffs from your entire team, right? So definitely excited to be able to use her in the near future too. Next up, we have Diene, one of the limited units here, getting a buff. So, Blessings of the Goddess is actually the S2, where she grants a barrier, right, and she's able to dispel 2 debuffs. So, this is actually going to get buffed, so that, actually, it's just kind of, some things are kind of switched around here, kind of like what they did with Tomoka. I still think it's a pretty decent buff though. They're taking away the dispelling from this S2, and they're giving her the grant attack on her S2. So now you can just go ahead and give the attack buff and a barrier to everyone for 2 turns with her S2, and then her S3, instead of granting an attack buff with the critical hit resistance right here with the awakened one, she will now dispel all debuffs from all allies. Still grants the critical hit resistance, no longer grants the attack buff, that's on the S2, right? But now she grants increased penetration resistance. Penetration resistance has finally become a buff, right? We've already seen it in the form of a passive with Empyrean Ilanov and Immortal Wukong, but Immortal Wukong also got it as a form of an EE. Now we're finally seeing it in the form of an official buff, And penetration resistance increase is pretty nutty because it increases penetration resistance by 50%. Empyrean Ilanov increases it for the team by 30%. And just imagine just how ridiculous this is going to be, because Empyrean Ilanov already protects the team a ton from penetration attacks, right? This is going to be insane. You can stack this with Empyrean Ilanov. You can stack this with Wukong. It's gonna be amazing. For any slower player, I think Diene is definitely gonna be a must build again unit. Just for this alone, right? Just for this alone, which is going to be worth building. Now, do keep in mind that the S3 and the S2 being swapped around is actually pretty decent too. The S3, right, you don't have to open up with this anymore. You can just actually open up with an S2, which grants the attack, the barrier, you can push up your team and all that good stuff. You can open up with that, and then when you lap back around later, you can actually pop this as well. It depends if you're playing, whether you're playing aggressively or you're playing a bit more defensively. If you're playing a bit more defensively, critical hit resistance, pretty decent, but you might want to save that dispel, right, for if you're a bit too fast. But again, she usually follows up after openers, so it is probably a good idea to pop that S3 to open up with regardless. Alright, next up we have Krau. His Awaken Potential update is here. So his S3, oh boy guys, this is so exciting. His S3, summon Siegfried. Nothing's really changed with how it works. Oh, we should just look at the fully awakened one here. So he used to grant a barrier for 2 turns with strength increase based on his max health, right? So he'll get like a set barrier based on percentage of his health after he S3s. Now he got some lifesteal built in, which is really cool. People already had like some lifesteal Kraus and things that are kind of troll and funny to see, but now that it's actually built into his kit, you can really just stack HP and focus on that as a stat. You can stack 3 HP sets and such, make him really bulky, because now he's gonna have his built-in Uberius effect. This is better than Uberius, by the way. Uberius receives, I think, 20%, and Escort buff receives 30%, but this receives 25% of damage suffered by all allies in their place, as long as your S3 is available. And your S3 is going to be available for pretty much most of the time that you have Krau on your side of the field, because you're not popping your S3 immediately. He does damage with his S3 based on the amount of HP that he's lost, right? Damage dealt increases proportional to caster's lost health. So you're not really doing much with your S3 anyway to start off with. You're probably just going to be S1 provoking a bunch of things and chipping away at them, S2 giving a defense buff and all that stuff, which is great. But this is a better Uberius, so you don't really need to run Uberius on him anymore. You can substitute another artifact on him. Holy Sacrifice, probably a pretty good one. And yeah, so you definitely don't want to stack another damage sharing artifact. You could also run him on things like Adamant Shield if you just want your team to be much tankier. That's also kind of nice. Right, the other good thing is, after you use your S3, he will no longer have this damage sharing effect, which is good, because after you use your S3, Krau's going to be kind of more on the squishier side. He's not going to be at max health anymore, and so you might not want him to be mitigating a ton of damage from your opponents. You don't want him to go down, right? Now, here's the great part. His old S3 used to take 20 souls, soul burn, and grants an extra turn. Now, his soul burn only requires 10 souls, and it decreases his damage dealt, but he has an AoE attack now. He basically turns into Last Rider Krau, and I am all for that. That is absolutely amazing, and I cannot wait to see what the damage is going to be like on this. I know the damage dealt is going to be decreased. It's understandable. You're turning a single target nuke into an AoE nuke. You don't want it to just like deal 30k damage to everyone on the other side, right? That makes Krau absolutely insane. But hopefully a damage dealt that's decreased isn't too much, so that he's still very much viable. I say that because there's so much injury running around. There's still no injury counter in the game. There's nothing that can heal injuries up, right? So Krau is still vulnerable to all that stuff. Being able to pull this off means that your opponent had to have drafted no injury and had to have just allowed Krau to sit around and marinate for quite a while, right? You really got to focus him down once he gets like around half his health, you really just gotta start bursting him down. But yeah, this is kind of cool. Love to see it. The last of the quad units that were introduced with the Awakened Potential update, but once that update was canceled, we never saw their skills until now. That's the last one. Krau, right? Ravi got hers, Valencia got hers, Closer Charles got his, and Krau is now completing the stack there. Now, the other thing to mention is that when an enemy was defeated before by his S3, it decreased the cooldown of the skill by 2 turns in the form of an EE. Now that is going to be changed just to flat out decrease the cooldown of his Summon Siegfried by 1 turn, which is great. His cooldowns are pretty long. His S3 cooldown is pretty long, but hey, now, I mean, honestly, with the Soulburn S3, if the damage is good enough, I don't think you need another turn for his S3, right? It's kind of nice. Double Krau teams, here we come. All right, next up we have Ludwig. A very interesting update here with the Ludwig, but the only thing that's really changed is before, after he attacked, when the target is stunned, he increased combat readiness by 50%. This is S2, that single target stuns a unit on the other side, right? You can also decrease buff duration, so you strip like immunity before getting the 100% chance to stun. Now they just kind of changed it so that you increase combat readiness by 50% no matter what. So you just S2, get the 50% combat readiness, and then if you're running him with Para, and you have the swift attack buff, then he gains another 50% combat readiness. He's now gonna have 100% combat readiness, which makes Ludwig another great unit to pair up with Para for some big damage nukes. So that's kind of cool. Kind of cool to see. I don't know if this will make him more viable, but I mean, this is still a good change regardless. Taking away anything that takes away a lot of conditions like this is fantastic, right? So this is good. And to those few Ludwig cleavers that exist out there, and for some reason the ones that I always match up into and they always beat me with their resist Ludwigs, good for you. I'm happy for you. Let's look at the exclusive equipments right here. So, his damage dealt by Moonlight Blow, that's the S2 that we just talked about here, is going to be changed so that it now increases the attack of the caster for 2 turns when using it. I believe this is going to be after using it, so he's going to S2 and then give himself the attack buff, and then when you get the combat readiness boost, you lap back around, take the extra turn, or with Para, you just take the turn immediately. You're going to rip an S3 with an attack buff. You don't need an attack buffer anymore for him, which is kind of cool. The other exclusive equipment that's changing is the condition here. When the target is an Ice Elemental hero, you get to decrease defense for 2 turns after using the S2. Well, now they just took away that. Again, anything taking away these stupid elemental restrictions is fantastic. Such an antiquated thing that's never worked. Even in old E7, these elemental, any unit with an elemental restriction never became meta, right? They never became meta. They were just bad. But exclusive equipments here, decrease defense for 2 turns when using Moonlight Blow. That is going to be kind of nice. I don't know, again, what his optimal EE is going to be. I'm leaning towards the attack one, just because it sets up for your S3, which is dealing the most amount of damage. When he gains invincibility from his S2, he gains defense penetration on his S3, so he'll ignore defense there. Alright, next up, we have the only 3-star in this update, but one that everyone has, Roz. Roz in his base form just got a bunch of damage dealt increases, which is kind of cool, and instead of recovering health and increasing defense for himself, he's just going to go ahead and increase defense of all allies for 2 turns, right? That's something that Adventurer Roz already had, so let's go over to him. Adventurer Roz has damage dealt increase for all of his skills here, the X-Slash, the Purifying Flame, kind of nice. But the main thing here is this. People kind of played around Roz's passive because they knew that as long as the backline unit as long as they suffered like an AoE attack, you can bypass this. They had to suffer a single target attack for this to proc, and the suffered damage had to be 30% or more of their max health in a single hit, right? In a single time that you hit him. So if you just chipped away at the opponent little by little by little, you will never proc the A-Roz here, and his barrier is only 2 turns. So now they changed it so that his rune, this is one of his awakening runes, after the ally in the back row is attacked, whenever they're 50% or less in terms of health, now he grants them a barrier for 3 turns. That is massive, because A-Roz was a pretty good support unit, a pretty decent knight actually, and used in RTA metas in the past. But this was the main thing. People are playing around this, and a lot of units now have AoEs in their kits, right? Not many units are just purely single target damage, so it's hard to kind of get this to proc. This is a great way to help him make modernize his kit, make it more versatile for the current meta. And his speed rune here, 60% chance to decrease defense for 1 turn, now has an 85% chance. I kind of wish this was a 100% chance, honestly, because there's still a chance to get 15%ed. Really wish this was a 100% chance. They even put it in red themselves. They knew, right? It'd be green if it was 100% though. But yeah, when you're doing PvE content and you hit that defense, hitting that defense break feels good. But 40% chance to not do it, especially when you're doing like Nightmare Labyrinths and stuff like that, it sucks, guys. This sucks. Having to restart runs and things, or have your runs take like an hour long just because this thing doesn't land, right? Because if you're doing Nightmare Labyrinth with limited options, Abros is one of the best options for one of the bosses. And if you don't land this defense break chance, oh my god, guys, that boss is a nightmare. Yeah, definitely a fantastic change. Again, if they could go back and tweak things though, make that 100% chance, be kind of nice. Okay, moving on, we got 2 artifact adjustments here. Wings of Light and Shadow. Let's start off with this one here. So it still increases critical hit chance by 15%, just flat crit chance increase, which is cool. But now when attacking, it increases damage dealt by 7 to 14%. Now, if you have this at a plus 15, then you're just going to get whatever's in the middle of this. I think it's like a 10.5% increase, right? Plus 15, you're going to get a flat 10.5. Let's just say 10% damage increase. And if you made a critical hit, it will increase the damage of the next attack by an additional 4 to 8%. Or if you just have a plus 15 artifact, it's 6%, right? So you're going to be up to 16% damage, which is decent. It's much better than what this was here. So this at least gives you starting damage dealt, and afterwards it scales up, right, some more. So pretty good overall, I'd say. Not too shabby. Especially because if you had a plus 15 here, you'd get 15% damage increase. But here, with the 10.5% and a 6%, you're already dealing more. 16.5%. You're at plus 15, this is always going to deal more damage than it used to. So you're not losing much there. It's not like a nerf or anything in disguise. Alright, next up. Oh boy, and a lot of people are talking about this one. Uberius' Tooth. So Uberius' Tooth is getting a buff where they're removing the single attack restriction. So now after attacking, including with AoEs, you will now have up to 100% chance to inflict additional damage to the target that scales with the caster's attack. So Uberius' Tooth, very popular with units like Amiki, for example, popular with things like Arunka as well, or maybe even the Fire Huayang, right, the OG Huayang. But Uberius' Tooth now can be applied to so many more units. People are saying that it's for ML Pera. I really don't think so. ML Pera's damage seems pretty lackluster with her splash, but the Immortal Wukong has the ability to scale up his attack up to 60% if he's hit, not crit, right? Also, he has an AoE on his S1 that deals pretty good damage. He also has a self-attack buff on his S3, and they made him so that if you have his EE that allows him to, whenever he counterattacks, he is going to be using his AoE hit and not the single target hit. So if you build a counter set Wukong with the AoE counter EE, with the Uberius' Tooth, you might be seeing quite a bit of value, especially if you couple him with Diene, who gives an anti-crit buff that will help along with his anti-crit passive, and penetration resistance to go along with his penetration resistance in his passive. Oh boy, Wukong is looking pretty fun to play, and I can't wait to try him out with this. Who knows, maybe we'll try a counter build and see how it plays out. But yeah, that is going to be it for this balance adjustment, guys. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Who do you think is the biggest winner here? I think the top 3 is definitely going to be Diene, Krau, and FCC, right? And I think perhaps in that order. I think Diene's going to be a bit more versatile than Krau, just because she doesn't care about injury on the other team. She's a support unit. Krau, kind of weak to injury and such, but his Siegfried is now going to be very, very scary, along with the fact that he has more self-sustaining and such. And Fallen Cecilia, well, you really can't go wrong with a 12 speed imprint, although this does seem like they're trying to shoehorn her into a more aggressive playstyle than she once was in. But with that being said though, guys, thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. Take care.